How's everyone doing? Welcome back to The Last Hike. Today I'm covering 4 gym influencers who slipped into Havasupai before sunrise without a reservation to shoot content inside one of Arizona's most dangerous canyons. Instead of turning back when the heat started taking its toll, they pushed farther for more photos and drone footage. That decision would take them deep enough into that canyon that the heat would cook them from the inside out and crack one of their skulls open on the canyon floor. It was August 9th, 2019. The Havasupai Reservation in northwestern Arizona sits deep inside a canyon system where the landscape itself becomes part of the danger. Massive sandstone walls rise hundreds of feet on either side and trap heat instead of letting it escape. By mid-morning in August, temperatures on the canyon floor regularly climb above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Those temperatures are recorded on the main trail where there are water sources and other hikers nearby. Getting into Havasupai is not as simple as buying a ticket at the entrance. Visitors need a permit that must be secured months in advance through the tribe's online reservation system. Most years, the available permits are gone within hours. The system is not only meant to limit the number of visitors, the canyon is remote, rescue resources are limited, and officials rely on permit records to know who is in the backcountry and roughly where they should be. If someone enters without a permit, they're not on any official record. No one's expecting them, and if they don't come back, no one knows to start looking. By 2019, this was not obscure information. The permit process had been discussed for years on hiking forums, travel blogs, and social media. Anyone who had seriously looked into visiting Havasupai would have known that permits were required. The trip was Sean Falco's idea. He was 26 and had built a fitness page posting workout videos, physique updates, and travel content that framed everything as an adventurous lifestyle. After they missed out on permits, he was the one who suggested going anyway. He was fit, confident, and used to being the most capable person in any room, and he carried that same assumption into environments that had nothing to do with a gym. The strongest athlete of the group was Drew Tilden. He was 25, Sean's closest friend, faster and fitter than most people around him. He had enough outdoor experience to feel comfortable in most situations, but not enough to appreciate how different this canyon could be. He agreed to Sean's plan without much hesitation. Aliyah Reeves had wanted to shoot Havasupai for over a year. She was 24 and had been dating Sean for about that long too. Her page focused almost entirely on carefully edited travel and lifestyle photos, and Havasupai had come up more than once in her content plans. The location was as much her motivation for the trip as anything else. The youngest of the 4, Cassidy Weston, had never done a backcountry hike before. She was 23 and had been close friends with Aliyah since high school. She came because Aliyah asked her to, and because on paper, it sounded like an adventure. Confidence can be surprisingly contagious. Once one person sounds like they know what they're doing, it's a lot easier for everyone around them to go along with it. The canyon holds onto heat in a way that catches many people off guard. The sandstone walls absorb heat throughout the day and slowly release it after sunset, so temperatures stay high long after the sun goes down. Airflow is limited, and even standing in the shade offers less relief than most people expect, because the surrounding rock continues radiating heat. The human body cools itself by sweating. As sweat evaporates, it carries heat away from the skin. That system only works as long as the body has enough fluid to keep producing sweat. As dehydration sets in, sweat production slows. Once that happens, body temperature begins to rise. The early warning signs can seem minor. A headache, nausea, dizziness, or simply feeling off are easy to brush aside. By the time those symptoms become obvious, the body is often already struggling to keep up. In a canyon that can reach 110 degrees with little airflow and limited shade, that decline can happen much faster than people realize. I've heard people describe desert hiking as a game of just staying ahead of your own body. Once your body starts falling behind, there's often no quick way to fix it. Beyond the main Havasu Creek route, an unauthorized side canyon becomes far more rugged. The trails are unmaintained, and much of the terrain is made up of loose, fractured sandstone. From a distance, the rock can look solid. Up close, it is often anything but. Sections that appear stable can break away under a person's weight without warning, and the fracture lines that weaken the rock are usually impossible to see from the surface. Sean had looked into Havasupai permits months before the trip. He knew how it worked, knew when it opened, and knew they had missed their chance after it sold out. Instead of giving up, he spent time reading hiking forums and scrolling through location-tagged posts from people who admitted they had gone in without permits and had no problems. He found enough stories to convince himself the risk was worth taking. He told the others they could probably get onto the trail before anyone questioned whether they had a reservation, and that the worst-case scenario was simply being turned around at the entrance. He sounded confident because he had done research. It just was not the kind of research that accounted for what could happen if something went wrong.
I think we've all fallen into this trap at some point. If enough people say, I did it and nothing happened, it starts feeling a lot safer than it actually is.
Their early start was part of the plan. They drove through the night hoping to reach the trail before anyone questioned whether they had a reservation. By 4:30 in the morning, they were already hiking by headlamp. No one stopped them. For a moment, it probably felt like all the research had paid off. They were carrying more gear than any of them were used to hiking with. Sean and Drew split the drone case and gimbal between their packs, even though drones were prohibited on the reservation without prior approval. Aliyah carried 2 camera bodies along with a portable lighting panel. Cassidy carried most of the shared supplies, including water, snacks, and a basic first aid kit that none of them had much experience using. The weight added up quickly, although no one seemed concerned about it.
I doubt any of them were thinking about conserving energy that morning. The gear probably felt like an investment, not something that would eventually work against them.
As they made their way along the permitted section of the trail, they passed other hikers who had also started before sunrise to avoid the worst of the heat. Everyone kept moving. No one questioned why the group was there. At about 6:15 that morning, the group reached a sign marking a side canyon as closed to visitors. Cassidy slowed down long enough to read it and glanced at the others. Sean kept walking without stopping. Drew followed him. Aliyah was looking at her phone, checking the location tag she wanted for photos. After a moment, Cassidy followed them. By then, the temperature had already climbed to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and the hottest part of the day was still hours away.
It's easy to look at 86 degrees and think, yeah, we're still good. The worst of the heat isn't here yet. Sometimes that's exactly when you're falling behind.
Aliyah had found the exact spot she wanted through a geotagged post from another creator. It was a section of an unauthorized side canyon about 2 miles off the main route, where the morning sun hit the sandstone at just the right angle. That was the destination. Sean's plan was simple. They would get there, film what they needed, and make it back to the main trail before the hottest part of the day. The terrain changed almost as soon as they left the main trail. The maintained trail disappeared, replaced by uneven rock shelves, loose stone, and sections where every step demanded attention. Within the first half mile, the drone case was already becoming a problem. It was bulky and awkward to carry. As Drew squeezed through a narrow section, it caught against the canyon wall and threw him off balance on a patch of loose scree. He caught himself, adjusted the case across his back, and kept going. Sean was already several yards ahead. Cassidy stayed at the back of the group. Unlike the others, she watched every step before putting her weight down. On one short scramble, she stopped completely, studied the route for a moment, and waited until Drew had made it to the top before climbing after him. The others kept moving and never looked back. They reached the location at around 9 that morning. The light was exactly what Aliyah had hoped for. The early sun lit the upper canyon wall and reflected down into the narrow canyon below. She immediately started directing the shoot. Sean set up the gimbal while Drew launched the drone. Before long, everyone was focused on getting the next shot. They stayed there for nearly 2 hours. They weren't just taking a few pictures. They kept moving to different spots, reviewing footage, waiting for the light to shift, and redoing shots they thought could look better. Before long, the morning had slipped away.
I can imagine someone saying, let's get one more shot. And nobody's thinking about what another 15 minutes might change.
During that time, they drank water regularly. It did not seem excessive. It was simply what anyone would do while hiking and filming in that kind of heat. But no one was paying attention to how much water they had left. Around 10:30, Cassidy picked up one of the shared bottles, noticed how light it felt, and quietly put it back down. The others were setting up another shot, and she did not want to interrupt. Instead, she finished what remained in her own bottle. By then, they'd already been hiking and filming for more than 6 hours. Even if they'd started with what seemed like plenty of water, they were going through it much faster than they'd expected. They were also eating protein bars throughout the morning. They were calorie-dense and familiar to all of them, but digesting food in extreme heat requires additional fluid. On its own, that would not have made much difference. Combined with the miles they had already covered, the heavy packs, and hours of constant heat, it became one more demand on bodies that were already under stress. By 11 o'clock, the temperature on the canyon floor was approaching 108 degrees. They had spent more than 4 hours surrounded by direct sunlight and heat radiating off the canyon walls. None of them were dressed for those conditions. They were wearing the same athletic clothes they normally wore to the gym or for fitness content. No one had a wide-brimmed hat, lightweight sun protective clothing, or anything that would have provided meaningful protection in an Arizona canyon in August. There's a big difference between dressing for comfort and dressing for conditions. The canyon wasn't exactly handing out bonus points for looking good though. Instead of turning around, Sean suggested going farther. He had seen another location online, a narrow slot canyon about a mile and a half deeper into the route. He said they could get a few more shots there before heading back. He said it with the same confidence he had shown all morning, as though the decision had already been made. Drew mentioned that the heat was getting to him. Sean acknowledged it, but kept packing up the gear. Aliyah was already looking at the route farther south on her phone, comparing the terrain ahead to the photos she had saved. She did not say much either way. Cassidy quietly suggested that they should start heading back. She was not arguing or trying to stop anyone. She simply thought they had gone far enough. Sean replied that they were already there, and it did not make sense to leave without getting everything they had come for. Drew had already shouldered his pack. Aliyah started walking. After a brief pause, Cassidy picked up her pack and followed. The stretch between the two locations was the most difficult part of the route so far. The scrambling became steeper, and the sandstone underfoot was looser and less predictable. They moved much more slowly than they had earlier that morning. They stopped more often, spoke less, and spent most of the hike focused on where to place their feet. Every mile made the heat harder to deal with. The heavy packs, the hours of hiking, and the water they had already lost were all beginning to catch up with them.
I don't think this part looked anything like the trip they pictured. It sounds more like they were grinding through it than really enjoying it.
Around noon, Cassidy said she had a pounding headache and felt like she might throw up. Sean told her to drink some water and keep moving. She unscrewed her bottle, looked inside, and realized there was barely anything left. Someone checked for a phone signal. There was none. They kept going. Nobody suggested stopping for long. At that point, they still believed they could get the last location and be heading back soon. They reached the slot canyon around 12:30. By then, all four of them were clearly feeling the effects of the heat. They were moving slowly, sitting down whenever they had the chance, and speaking very little. Between the four of them, they had less than a quarter of their water remaining. It started with Drew. On the eastern side of the slot canyon was a sandstone ledge, about 15 feet above the ground. It offered a clear view across the canyon, and Drew climbed toward it without much hesitation. From below, nothing about the ledge stood out as especially dangerous, especially to someone with Drew's experience. He reached the top, raised his camera, and shifted his weight. The rock beneath him suddenly gave way. There was no loud crack or obvious warning. The entire section, roughly 4 feet across, broke free all at once. Sandstone can fail that way because the fractures that weaken it often run deep inside the rock and cannot be seen from the surface. Drew fell with the collapsing slab. He landed on his feet first, then slammed onto his left side before his head struck the canyon floor. Part of the broken rock came down on top of him. His left leg absorbed most of the impact. The tibia snapped with enough force that the broken bone pushed through the skin just below his knee. The rest of the fall left him with serious blunt force injuries to his left shoulder and the left side of his head. By the time Sean and Aliyah reached him, he was still conscious, but he was confused and unable to respond clearly. He could only make incoherent sounds, and the area around his left eye was already beginning to swell shut. They managed to lift the rock slab off Drew, but there was little else they could do. Cassidy stayed back near the canyon wall, while Sean and Aliyah tried to assess his injuries. None of them had any real medical training. They had nothing sturdy enough to splint his leg, no way to stabilize his head, and no safe way to move him without risking even more damage. Sean pulled out his phone. There was no signal. Drew's phone had been thrown from his pack during the fall. The drone controller had GPS, but it could not contact anyone. The temperature had climbed to 111 degrees Fahrenheit. They were about 2.5 miles beyond the main route in an unmaintained side canyon. There was no marked trail, no shade structures, and no one else anywhere nearby. Because they had entered the reservation without a valid permit, no one outside the group had any official record that they were there.
That detail really got to me. This is why permits matter more than most people realize. Imagine needing help that badly and nobody even knows they're supposed to be looking for you.
There were not many options. Carrying Drew out over that terrain was not realistic, and staying put meant waiting with no way to call for help. Sean made the call. Sean decided that he and Cassidy would head back for help while Aliyah stayed with Drew. Before leaving, Sean propped his backpack against a large rock near Drew so it would be easy to spot from a distance. He took one of the 2 remaining water bottles and left the other with Aliyah. Sean and Cassidy started back just after 1 that afternoon. Sean pushed ahead, stopping whenever Cassidy fell too far behind, but every stretch of exposed rock was taking more out of him. Within about 20 minutes, Cassidy began falling behind. She was no longer sweating the way she had been earlier. When Sean reached out to steady her across a loose section of rock, her skin felt hot and unusually dry. She walked with slow, careful steps and barely spoke. At first, it looked as though she was simply concentrating on the difficult terrain. Soon it became obvious that something else was wrong. Sean was still moving faster than she was. He had been in better physical condition from the start, and he had gone through slightly less water during the morning. Even so, the heat was taking its toll on him as well. He would get ahead, stop to wait for Cassidy, then start moving again. About 40 minutes into the return hike, Cassidy lowered herself onto a flat rock in an exposed section of the canyon with no shade. She said she just needed a minute. Sean handed her the last of the water he was carrying and waited. The bottle was empty after that. After a short rest, she stood up and they continued. 10 minutes later, she sat down again. This time, her breathing was noticeably different. It was quick, shallow, and uneven. Her face had turned a deep red, and when Sean asked if she was okay, she answered slowly. Her words no longer matched his questions. She was still awake and sitting upright, but she was clearly becoming confused. Sean stayed with Cassidy for a while before deciding he had to keep moving if anyone was going to get help. Nearby, he found a small rock overhang that offered the only patch of shade in that stretch of canyon. He helped her into it. He leaned the empty bottle against the rock where it could be seen and left his phone beside her even though it had no signal. Then he continued on alone with nothing but the clothes he was wearing. The remaining hike back to the permitted trail was about a mile and a half. It took him nearly an hour and a half to cover it. He moved slowly, stopping often and staying as close to the canyon wall as he could whenever there was even a little shade. By the time he reached a section of trail where a small group of hikers was making their way out, he was in serious distress. He made it as far as a flat section of rock near the trail edge before he stopped moving. A small group of hikers found him there. He was conscious enough to respond when they spoke to him, but could not stand and could not give a clear location for the others. Over the next several minutes, he stopped responding to their voices. He died before emergency responders reached him.
It was the first time anyone outside the group even knew they were in the canyon. There was no permit on file, no entry record, and no expected return time that would have flagged anything as wrong.
The information had to be passed along through others before it reached emergency responders. By then, nearly 2 hours had passed since Drew's fall. Responders arrived to find Sean where the hikers had left him, still in the same position on the rock. Rescuers still faced several more hours before they could reach the group. Ground teams had to make their way through the same unmarked, unmaintained terrain in the same extreme heat, with only a rough idea of where the others might be. The canyon walls were too narrow for a direct landing in most sections, and the extreme heat made flying conditions difficult, so ground teams had to cover much of the distance on foot. There was simply no fast way to reach the group. Back at the Slot Canyon, Alaya was alone with Drew. Since the fall, he had drifted in and out of consciousness. At times, he seemed to recognize her voice. A few minutes later, he would stop responding again. She used the little water she had left to wet his lips and cool his face, hoping to keep him responsive for as long as possible. Sometime during the afternoon, he stopped responding altogether. Alaya stayed beside him in the narrow strip of shade along the canyon wall. As the afternoon wore on, even that patch of shade slowly shrank. By then, she had no water left. She had already exhausted herself trying to help Drew after the fall, and now she was sitting for hours in a canyon where the temperature remained well above 100 degrees. There was nowhere she could realistically go, no way to call for help, and no way of knowing whether anyone was even looking for them yet. By mid-afternoon, the narrow strip of shade along the canyon wall had disappeared completely. What happened after that was reconstructed from the scene. At some point, Alaya had tried to move. She only made it about 20 or 30 feet in the direction of the trail before collapsing. When rescuers reached her, she was lying on the ground facing the way out, only a short distance from where she had stayed with Drew. Drew died in the canyon sometime that afternoon. Alaya died a few hours later. Cassidy was found where Sean had left her beneath the small rock overhang. The empty water bottle was still propped against the rock, and Sean's phone was lying nearby. She was still alive when ground teams reached her, but she was unresponsive. She was airlifted out of the canyon, but died before she could reach a hospital. Cassidy Weston died from hyperthermia after her core body temperature rose beyond the point her body could recover. Severe dehydration and prolonged exposure to extreme heat without access to water were listed as contributing factors. Drew Tilden died before rescuers could reach him. The fall left him with a compound fracture of his left tibia and a traumatic brain injury caused by blunt force trauma to the left side of his skull. The coroner concluded that the combination of the head injury, blood loss from the open fracture, and prolonged heat exposure made survival unlikely even if help had arrived sooner given how remote the location was. His camera was recovered a few feet from where he fell. The footage ended mid-shot. Alaya Reeves died from hyperthermia and dehydration. Her phone was recovered beside her. The last photos on it were time-stamped at 11:47 that morning, less than an hour before Drew's fall. Sean Falco died on the trail less than a mile from the main route. The cause was hyperthermia and severe dehydration. He had covered more ground than the others, but had done so in direct sun with no water and nothing to slow the heat working through him. He was found by the hikers who had tried to help him, still sitting where they had left him. Investigators used GPS data from the drone controller, along with timestamps from the group's cameras and phones, to reconstruct their movements and determine how far into the unauthorized side canyon they had traveled. The deaths were ruled accidental. The official findings identified unauthorized entry into the restricted area, an inadequate water supply, and the resulting delay in rescue efforts as the primary factors that contributed to all deaths. The drone itself was never recovered.
I think this story shows that confidence and preparation are not the same thing. You can have plenty of one without nearly enough of the other.